Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I thought we'd revisit the store-bought Phalaenopsis and do a concise care guide. And I'm going to call it concise because these really are so tolerant. They'll put up with so many different environments and still do okay. I mean, I've got some orchids in here. If you deviate from their likes, they'll go downhill. Some will even die if they're too far off. Whereas with the store-bought Phalaenopsis, they're complex hybrids. Most of that fussiness has just been bred out of them over the years. And a lot of work's gone into achieving that. So that's where they are. Right. First of all then, temperatures. Simple statement, if you're comfortable, your plants probably are. Now what do I mean by that? Because people vary. I can be comfortable at 15 degrees centigrade, but a lot of people wouldn't be. Depends what I'm doing. If I'm busy, I don't take any notice of the temperature. I just get on with stuff. But ideal range of temperature for these is from 16 degrees centigrade up to about 25-26 degrees centigrade. You'll have to do your own Fahrenheit conversions. I'm not messing about with doing both, so I'd have to go and look it up. So somewhere in between there. What is important is a change between the daytime temperature and the nighttime temperature. Doesn't have to be dramatic, but a few degrees, 3, 4, 5, would be good. Now most homes do that naturally. The problem you might get is in the depths of winter, where you leave your heating on overnight and your temperatures remain constant throughout day and night. But not too many people do that. I personally see no point in keeping the house warm when I'm in bed. My heating comes on to start it warming up before I get up in the really cold weather, so that I don't get up into a freezing cold house, which is about the time it's getting light. Which is about the time the temperature would naturally rise for the plant. So that sort of works okay. So that's temperatures. Also, I'll put a warning shot out. If you're going to grow Phalaenopsis on windowsills, keep them out the sun, unless it's really early morning sun or late afternoon sun, and then only for a short time. They're not high light orchids. Yeah. The other thing is, if you've got them on a windowsill, watch what you do at night. Yeah. I mean, a north-facing windowsill would be brilliant for these. They can go right up quite close to the glass then. But watch your temperatures. When you get really cold weather outside, you'll get a chill within a few inches of the glass. Even if it's double glazed, you put your hand there, you'll see. Yeah. So don't keep them too close to the glass. And in cold weather, or hot weather for that matter, for goodness sake, don't hide them behind your curtains or your blinds or your drapes, whatever you want to call them. When you get colder weather and you get that chill on the glass, if you close your curtains, you'll get a severe drop in temperature overnight between the curtains and the window. And it can be quite dramatic. You don't ever know that's going on because you're the other side of the curtains. So watch shutting plants off behind curtains, especially when it's cold. Yeah, so go steady. They don't need to go on a windowsill. There are plenty of other places in the home where they will get sufficient light. They don't need high light. They'll put up with relatively low light. I mean, they're classed as shady growers. That's dependent on where in the world you live. In some places, what would be shady would be reasonable light in other countries. So yeah, so there's sort of light levels and temperatures. They don't need bright light. If you get them in the light that's too bright, the leaves will start probably going pale. You could even burn them. Yeah, don't forget, it's not necessarily the heat that burns the leaves. It's the dehydration due to the sun warming the leaves up. They lose so much moisture, you get cell damage. That's the burn. Yeah, and light through glass generates heat. Yeah, so if you're in any doubt if your plants are getting a bit too much light, yeah, feel the leaves. If they're warm to the touch, they're too warm. The leaves themselves shouldn't heat up. Yeah? If you've got a place where that does happen, you might think about getting a little fan. Yeah? The moving air will help cool the leaves down. But these are warm growers. They shouldn't really need it. Yeah? So that's that. Watering. Simple thing is, first of all, get them in a very well drained mix. It doesn't matter whether it's organic or inorganic, as long as the water you pour in the main, comes out the bottom of the pot and doesn't sit around for ages and ages. If you take a look at this little one here, yeah, the bottom bark is still a little bit dark in colour, but I've got no roots down in that area. I mean, this was the little plant that was I thought was attached to the other one. It turns out it wasn't. This is growing some roots now. There's a new one coming out up there. This one's pushing on. But most of the roots I've got on this plant are in the top. So in this case, it would be better to water than not water, because these roots are dry. They're all a silvery grey colour. So I would water that one. Once these roots get going a bit and get farther down in the pot, that layer will stop happening. But at the moment, it's got a layer in it. Right, let's have a look at this one then. As far as watering is concerned, first of all, when I pick it up, it's light as a feather. Again, a little bit of dark bark. But now look at this one. Where the roots are, the bark has dried out near the base of the pot. Where the roots aren't, it's not quite dry yet. And again, where the roots are, it's dried down to the bottom of the pot. Yeah? So in between the roots getting down to the bottom of the pot, you might need to water when there's still a bit of dark bark. That needs watering. That's dry. Yeah? There's a tiny little bit of condensation in a couple of areas in the pot. That's temperature change. It's not wet bark. So that needs watering, that one. I'll do it in a minute. So I'm talking at the moment. Let's have a look at the third one. So I'm trying to get a feel over for what's going on. Right, so here we've got a little bit of darker bark near the bottom, but not much. But round this side we've got quite a bit, and round this side we've got no roots. Where the roots are, the bark's dried off. Yeah? So again, that needs watering. You can, when you get used to it, if you've got a few plants and not hundreds, you get used to the weight of the pot and you pick it up and you think, oh, that's light as a feather, that needs watering. But also check your bark or your media, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be bark. I'm just one of those that likes organic media. It's not essential, you know. Phalaenopsis will grow in anything, and I stuck that one there just to show that in the wild, that's how they grow. They just grow attached to a branch or a tree trunk, and their roots attach. A lot of them will be aerial, but they've got high humidity. That's the difference, and they get rained on a lot. So you can grow a Phalaenopsis mounted, but your workload goes up dramatically. Yeah? So that was just to show the outside of a pot. Right, feeding. These are monopodial orchids. They haven't got canes or pseudobulbs, so they have no storage organs like quite a lot of other orchids. I won't say most, but a lot have got storage organs, and that enables them to withstand a bit of a drought now and again. They'll live off their reserves. These haven't got any. They can hold an amount in these nice thick fleshy leaves, but it won't last long, especially if it's warm. Yeah? So these need a constant supply of feed and water, bearing in mind the roots do best if they're allowed to dry in between. Yeah? But constant flushing will deprive them of food. And at that point, especially if they're growing new leaves, you'll find your old leaves will start to die, because it will pull all its reserves, which is very little, up from the base of the plant to aid the growing points. So you lose your old leaves. A well-fed and hydrated Phalaenopsis should not be dropping leaves very often. You will get an old one go. every now and again. But it should really be being replaced by 1 for 1 at the bare minimum, and 2 for 1's better. 3 for 1's great. So 3 new ones for every old one. If you look at this plant, these are seedling leaves. Yeah? It doesn't matter if they go. They don't do much for the plant anyway. And I suspect all of these have got, yep, they've all got seedling leaves, because these were all grown from seedlings out of a flask from the cloning culture. Yeah? So those little leaves at the base, it doesn't matter too much if they come off. But once you get to your full-size leaves, the goal is to keep them as long as possible. So constant supply of feed. Some say these are high feeders and they need quite a bit. Yeah? I think a constant supply is the more important factor than how much, if you see what I mean. But they are classed as high feeders, like Vandas, as classed as high feeders. Very little in my grow room gets high feed. Depends what you call high, though. You know, you ask some people, and I mean, I've asked people about what they feed their Cattleyas on. And one guy who grows absolutely superb Cattleyas, he says, oh, I feed mine at about 600 microsiemens. Well, in parts per million terms, it's about a 2/3 relationship. So that would be about 400 parts per million. That's, for me, high. But he doesn't feed every time he waters. Yeah? So that you have to bear that in mind. Quite honestly, with a flush now and again, you can feed your Phalaenopsis every time you water. They need a constant supply. I would suggest that feeding Phalaenopsis at around 300 parts per million would be fine. Probably so would 200. Probably so would 400. It's not an exact science. And don't lose your sleep over it. Just make sure your plants get some food, suitable food that's got everything in it. Yeah? And if you're using tap water, you need to go careful on what's already in the tap water before you start adding your fertiliser in, because tap water tends to have, well, certainly in the UK, quite high calcium levels. It's not really the right sort of calcium for orchids, because it's calcium carbonate. That's what furs your kettle up. Hard water deposits, yeah. That isn't readily absorbed by plants. It's calcium nitrate that they get access to quickly and easily. If you can use rainwater, do it. Or a substitute like reverse osmosis or distilled water or something. And then you've got a pretty precise feeding regime, because you know what your starting point is. Yeah? With tap water, my tap water comes out at about 270 parts per million. That's higher than I normally feed. And I don't know what's in it, so I don't like it. But some people, you know, I mean, in the old days when I just had a few Phalaenopsis before I moved down here, they just got stuck under the tap. They didn't all die. But they probably could have grown better if they'd had a better quality source of water. Right, so we've done light levels, we've done temperature ranges, we've done where not to put them. The places not to put them is behind curtains on cold nights, above radiators, sat on top of your TV if it gets warm. Yeah? Hot, dry air doesn't do any orchid any good at all. Next we get to humidity. The humidity in a house under normal circumstances is probably okay for Phalaenopsis. I suspect your house hovers at around 40–45% humidity. That's fine for these. Yeah, they'll be okay. Just make sure they are hydrated though. Obviously, the drier the air, the faster they will transpire the water out of the leaves. Yeah, and the warmer it gets, the faster that process goes. Yeah, so if you've got warm, dry air and you let them stay dry too long, they will dehydrate. Dehydrated Phalaenopsis leaves go limp and floppy, and sometimes you can pull them back. Sometimes they won't have it. Those leaves just stay like that forever, and they're not working properly at that point. So you've got to wait for new leaves to grow. So the best way is not to let them get like that. If you can add some humidity trays, get a little bit of localized humidity around your plant areas, that works quite well. Growing them in amongst other plants that are also giving off moisture, like ferns and things like that, that also works well. So these are not high humidity needers. Right, next we get on to blooming. Now, when you buy a store-bought Phalaenopsis, it's been forced into bloom. Phalaenopsis come into two main categories: winter bloomers and summer bloomers. When you've just gone out to the store and bought one in bloom, you haven't got a clue what it's supposed to be. All you know is that it was in bloom when I got it. Well, that doesn't mean to say that's how it's going to revert when it gets into synchronized with seasons and things. But a lot of Phalaenopsis start to spike in the autumn. Some say that you can encourage those spikes by having a bit of a drop in temperature around that time of year. Personally, I think if they're ready to spike, they flipping will. The time of year doesn't matter. If you've got a summer bloomer in its natural sort of cycle of events, then the spikes will start in early spring. Yeah, well, you could say that those spikes are being triggered by the temperatures rising a bit or the light levels getting a bit better. I just think they spike when they're good and ready, quite honestly. You can choose to do as you please. Yeah? If you think a bit of a drop in temperature in autumn will help the spikes come, then do it. But then perhaps next year try not doing it and see if they spike anyway. If you've got like a spare one that's settled down into a regular blooming cycle. Yeah? Put one to one side and think, oh, I'm not going to cool that one down this year. Let's see if it misses out on blooming. I doubt if it will. Not with these store-bought stuff, you know. So there we go, that's blooming. So-called inducing spikes may or may not work. I personally don't play around with different fertilizers like the bloom boosters and the growth boosters. Mother Nature don't, I nearly said arse around then, and then I went and said it, doesn't mess about adjusting feed at different times of year. They get what they're given, as and when, you know, and they put up with it. So I don't believe in playing around with different fertilizers. It just complicates matters, probably unnecessarily. Some say they work. Some say, oh, until I used a bloom booster, this one would never bloom. Or perhaps it wasn't ready to bloom, and it was coincidence. That's up to you. Right, spikes. If you don't train your spikes, some will grow upright, most will arch over. Yeah? The thing to watch as your spike is growing is your light source. Don't keep changing the aspect of the plant towards your light source. Your blooms will come out all over the flipping place because it won't know whether it's coming or going. So sort of think to yourself, when you pick your plant up to water it or move it for any reason, which way is the spike pointing? Which way are the leaves pointing? And put it back in the same place. Let the spike grow naturally. The blooms will then face your light source. And then once they start opening, you can turn it round the other way and they'll all be facing you instead of facing the window. Yeah? So, right, other things with spikes. So you choose whether you want to stake them or not. That's up to you. They take up a lot more space if you let them arch over, and they are more prone to knocking the buds about when you're moving the plants. Yeah? So your choice. When you buy them, they're normally staked. That's for transport. Yeah, they want the plant as thin and narrow and upright as possible to cram as many into the crate as they can get. So that's that. Bud blast on Phalaenopsis. I think, thinking back, I've had a couple of orchids have bud blast, but I've had more buds blast on Phalaenopsis than anything else. And it tends to happen as the buds are developing. Once they've opened, they're normally safe. No matter what you do, they'll probably be okay. But the sort of things that are called bud blast are dramatic changes in the environment. So going from cool to warm, going from dry air to moist air to dry air, going from still air to putting a fan on and causing a draft. Yeah? So it's a change in the environment around the buds. So try and keep them nice and constant as your buds are forming. Try and get your buds to face the same way by literally training them towards your light source, and then once the blooms are open, you've got your spike. They will last anything from, on these type of orchids, anything from a couple of months to 3 or even 4. Next thing that may happen is your blooms start to die back, but you may have branches on your spikes. Yeah, they may start to branch out and produce some more buds, and sometimes they can do that often enough that they just remain permanently in bloom, or at least in bud. You can do that if your plant's strong and healthy. Just let it go, let it keep blooming over and over and over, but you'll probably find on a plant like that that you haven't had any new leaves for some time. It's using all its energy to produce its blooms. Yeah? If that's happening, you might want to up your feed level a little bit so that it can produce the buds and the blooms and perhaps a new leaf now and again. Remember, they haven't got the ability to store their food. You know, it goes into the plant and gets used and it's gone. So they need some more. So that sort of thing. There comes a time, I believe, that the spike starts looking untidy and tatty because it's got bits sticking out all over the place. The original nice shape has gone. Blooms might be starting to get a bit smaller or less frequent. It's time to start a new spike, basically. It's time to take that spike off. Give the plant a rest from blooming. And the chances are, if it hasn't grown any new leaves for a while, that's the point it'll start growing some leaves. And then later, it'll produce a new spike. And then you start all over again. Yeah. If you cut a spike, you've got choices. There's always choices. If you look down this spike here, yeah, it's got nodes. There's one under the clip. I'll see if I can move that. There. So we've got one there and one there and one right down near the base. If I cut that spike here about ½ an inch, centimetre, centimetre and a half above the node, the chances are this node will sprout. But it won't always sprout with buds, a spike that's going to produce buds. Sometimes it will sprout with a new little plant. And they can be grown on. A keiki on a Phalaenopsis spike will be a clone, a copy. So you get another plant. Wait till it gets some good open leaves and enough roots to support itself, and you can detach it and plant it up as a new plant. And they come into bloom quite quickly because they've come off of a blooming sized plant as opposed to being grown on from a seedling. So they're not too bad. So you have choices. When your first set of blooms go, if there's no sign of any branches up there, you can cut it a bit above a node and it may branch out. It might not. It might just die back anyway. But if you think that's a good idea, you can give it a go. If you want to take the spike off, take it down quite close to the base, but not right up against the base of the plant. It's a possibility of a form of infection. That one's had a spike that's been cut about right. Could have possibly been a little bit shorter, but don't cut it right back to the stem. Yeah? And I would suggest, if a spike's died right back and it's brown and it's dead, you just cut it off and forget it. However, if it's still green, it's still got living tissue on it, I would suggest putting a little bit of cinnamon on the cut to dry it off and seal it and stop any form of infection getting in the cut. Okay, so that's that. We've already done a repot in the series, so we've had a chat about, you know, taking old dead roots off and all that sort of stuff. So that's about it really, but just bear in mind there is no precise method for growing these store-bought Phalaenopsis. They are so tolerant, they will put up with all sorts of nonsense and still grow and still bloom. So there's never a panic level. There's never, oh my God, I'm killing all my orchids. Yeah? It should be simple. And they do grow well in the home. So hope that helps. That's a brain dump basically. Anything you think I've missed out or you want to know, just stick it in the comments as usual and I'll see what I can do. I don't profess to know everything there is about Phalaenopsis. I don't grow that many. But they are simple in comparison to some other types of orchids. So that's that. I hope you've enjoyed that, and I'll add that into the store-bought Phalaenopsis set playlist, and that can sit there for all time for people who want to look into it. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.